This is a video about conflict of interest. I wanted to make this video because some countries have different policies regarding conflict of interest, like coronavirus. Coronavirus is a very clear indicator of the conflict of interest in each country. You can have elections and you can spread the virus. This is a conflict of interest for health. Judges must not allow any more elections if these are not digital, as I mentioned in coronavirus video number 1. And this is a conflict of interest of a very big risk to the health of society. Then we have also got the conflict of interest of unfair competition from governments. In some countries, we have theaters, museums, training, selection. Selection, we have a huge problem in some countries that governments are entering into this area of business. Who knows? Perhaps they enter into the software business, into the social media business. Probably, yes, but is this legal? I don't think it is legal. I don't think it is necessary to have so many conflict of interests. In other associations, I have seen conflict of interest because the managers of associations end up later working for one of the members. And this is a huge conflict of interest because that means that did they previously in the association work for such priority member? Well, that is a huge conflict of interest. And this kind of conflict of interest are kind of penal repercussions. You cannot get into making competition with the private sector because the private sector works at about 2% fee like my group does, and then the public sector works at about 1,000 margin. So it's not possible that we can compete with 1,000 margin. They should not be allowed by judges to enter into the private world. I mentioned a lot of conflicts of interest in all these kind of areas. For example, we have the buildings, which I made some videos about, and we have governments entering into private buildings, controlling the board or of the presidency of the administration of the building, and therefore the criteria of the public institutions fight against the private, because we have seen it in our own building here and in many other buildings. Why do we need 50,000 public buildings? Why they do not share the communications overheads, the personnel, etc.? Why they do not sell these 50,000 buildings worth around 300 billion and unite the human resources on these government buildings? Because if they don't do that, they are competing with the private business persons that do have private buildings. And that's a huge conflict of interest. How can you compete with a 2% margin if your neighbor has collective bargaining agreement that they work 6 hours per day, they have rights and not so many obligations, their KPIs are about 0 and yours are 100? How cannot judges fight to help this conflict of interest? Analyzing all the associations in the world, if there is a director of the association that has gone to work directly for a member afterwards. For example, another conflict of interest is that, and of course, they could audit the statutes, they could audit the accounts, they could audit, please do so. You will find so much the conflict of interest that this will be beneficial for the economy, because $1 conflict or euro conflict of interest has indirect 10. One job lost in industry has 10 indirect jobs. So that's the rule of thumb. One thumb is 10. So if you eliminate one unfair competition situation, then you are eliminating 10. So if you study all the associations that are controlled by governments, private associations, then you are eliminating 10. Imagine how much you, judge, can you today for fair competition, which is a right of humans, like health is, and we see in each country a conflict of interest regarding health prevention, because each country has its own measures, and that's a conflict of interest for the health of humans. If one country does have this policy and has, let's say, 3 million infections of coronavirus, why another with 0 has to be infected? This is a huge conflict of interest. Why did the low protected lose the battle against the big protector? This is a huge conflict of interest. There is another huge conflict of interest, for example, when politicians jump from politics into a foundation, which I really made a video about foundations before. And there is also another conflict of interest when the politicians jump into private companies. Why do they go to private companies? Is it because the contacts they have in these countries? Then is it possible that you can jump from a public politician top management job into a private position? That should be forbidden. That's not allowed. In our company, we are free conflict of interest company. We have made a code of conduct. It is very simple. In our case, 100% owner of Candina Group. So we have made this policy of conduct, code of conduct of ethics, and we have clarified that which are the conflict of interest. We get 0 commissions from suppliers, and we directly pass all the discounts in the benefits of scales suppliers to ship owners. There is no conflict. Now, for example, as even honorary consul, I could have a conflict with some clients, which they have asked me if being a consul is a conflict of interest. But if you are being paid by serving this country, then, and if you are a government official, then it would be a conflict of interest. So could any general consul be a member of a company? Of course not, because it is a conflict of interest. You will be defending your country and also defending the company. There is a conflict between one and the other. And this is kind of the situations that today are arising. And this is not, coronavirus is not the guilty for that economies are falling. No, there is a conflict of interest because small and medium companies represent 90% of world's jobs, and they do not have a 5% tax, which is enough to pay for health, security, and education. So if in one country you make them pay 100, there is a conflict of interest with another small and medium company in another country that has, let's say, 50, 30, because it cannot compete. So it's not coronavirus, it's the conflict of interest. If we all analyze conflict of interest free economies, probably we would arise to the break-even point, which is 5% tax for small and medium companies. Probably there would be not any unemployment, probably minimum wages would be much higher, probably it would be equality and non-discrimination between small and medium companies, because it is a huge conflict of interest that some company in one country cannot compete with another in the same equality. It's not possible. And this is because conflict of interest, because governments enter and control, and because associations are not as clear as they should be, and they should have a policy and an audit done today, 29th of June, so that this is the case, because the damage, the collateral is 10 times. So it's 11. 1 times 10 is 11. And this is the reason why I thought it was so interesting to make this video, because perhaps some countries would understand and would like to take this kind of audits, which any student can do. You don't need to have a huge university degree, very expensive degree, to compare what are the conflicts of interest in your country. Do you work for this company? Do you work for another? Is your information confidential? Yes. Then, do you have a code of work? Yes. Ethics? Yes. Code of good practices? Yes. Does everybody in the company sign them? Yes. Do you have 100% indicators? Yes. Well, perhaps 90. Are you getting there? Yes. Okay. And this kind of audits can be done very clearly and very fast, even in digital ways, like, for example, getting the certification multi-site, multi-systems nowadays digitally. It is a conflict of interest that one company, one country has availability of this, another company has another availability. That's a huge conflict. And if we do not work equally in health, security, and education, we have a huge conflict of interest. So I hope that you judges, specialists in this, yes, judges, start working today. Please do so. We need your recommendations regarding this. Thank you. Bye.